Priscus Attalus was the 85th Roman emperor, ruling in towards the very end of the Western Roman Empire in the late 5th century. His reign occurred during a time of internal fragmentation, external invasions, and a steady decline in the empire's stability and power. While his time in power was short, his story is part of the broader narrative of the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Priscus Attalus was born into the Roman aristocracy, but not much is known about his early life or family background. He was likely a member of the senatorial class, a group of elites who had significant influence in Roman politics, even though the empire was in its final stages. His rise to power appears to have been part of a larger political struggle within the Western Roman Empire, particularly involving the struggle for control between rival factions. By the time Attalus came to prominence, the empire had already been weakened by decades of civil war, barbarian invasions, and internal dissent. The Western Roman Empire, under pressure from these many external and internal forces, had already been reduced to a fraction of its former size and power. The imperial court was fragmented, with various individuals and military commanders holding sway over different regions. The empire's leadership had become increasingly unstable, and several emperors had been deposed or assassinated. Attalus's ascent to the imperial throne was not the result of a popular uprising or military conquest, but rather a product of political maneuvering among the Roman elite. He was raised to the position of emperor in 409 AD, at a time when the Western Roman Empire was in a state of crisis. The empire was facing significant pressure from external groups like the Visigoths, Vandals, and other Germanic tribes. The Visigoths, under their king Alaric I, had been a significant threat, and they had already sacked Rome in 410 AD, further undermining the authority of the Western emperor. Meanwhile, factions within the empire struggled to maintain control over its territories. Attalus was appointed as emperor by the forces of the Gothic general, the king of the Visigoths, who sought to use him as a puppet ruler. The Visigoths, who had been causing significant turmoil in the western provinces, needed a figurehead emperor to solidify their power in Italy and Rome. They chose Attalus, likely because he had the appropriate status as a Roman noble, but was sufficiently pliable to serve their interests. His reign was thus tied to the ambitions of the Visigoths rather than his own, with the real power lying with Alaric I and his Gothic forces. Priscus Attalus's reign lasted only a few years, from 409 to 410 AD. His time as emperor was marked by his tenuous position as a puppet ruler, subject to the demands of Alaric and the Visigoths. Though nominally in charge of the empire, Attalus was not truly independent. His role was largely symbolic, as Alaric and the Visigoths wielded the real power. During his brief reign, Attalus was unable to bring any significant stability to the empire, which was under siege from barbarian invasions, both external and internal. The empire had already lost many of its most valuable provinces, and the political structures that had once held the empire together were crumbling. The Visigoths, after installing Attalus, continued their military campaign against Rome, and the city would eventually be sacked in 410 AD. This event marked a dramatic turning point in the decline of the Western Roman Empire, as it was the first time in nearly 800 years that Rome had been captured by a foreign enemy. Attalus's government was not able to halt or reverse the damage being done to the empire. Despite his formal title, he was essentially a figurehead who was powerless to effect real change. His reign occurred during a time when imperial authority was fragmented and the empire was no longer able to mount effective resistance against the forces pressing in from all sides. The fall of Attalus came swiftly as his usefulness to the Visigoths diminished. In 410 AD, after the sacking of Rome, the Visigoths turned on their puppet emperor. Alaric I, recognizing that he had little use for Attalus as a figurehead, deposed him and replaced him with a more pliable ruler. The political instability of the empire, combined with the rise of other powers such as the Vandals and Huns, meant that any emperor, no matter how capable, would struggle to maintain control over the Western Roman territories. Attalus was forced to retire from the imperial throne, and his fate afterward is unclear. Some sources suggest that he was exiled, possibly to a remote part of the empire, where he lived out the rest of his life in obscurity. Others claim he was allowed to live in relative comfort, but without any significant political power. Whatever the case, his brief and largely ineffective reign marked the end of any meaningful imperial authority in the West. Priscus Attalus's brief reign is not one that stands out for significant achievements or reforms. Rather, his legacy is marked by his role in the larger political turmoil of the Western Roman Empire's final years. His appointment as emperor by the Visigoths highlights the extent to which the Western Roman Empire had been reduced to a shadow of its former self, with foreign powers dictating the leadership and direction of the empire. Attalus's reign serves as a reminder of the dramatic shift that was taking place in the Roman world, where military leaders and barbarian kings had greater influence over the fate of the empire than the emperor himself. The deposition of Attalus by the Visigoths illustrates the decline of the Western Roman Empire's political institutions and the increasing power of barbarian leaders within the Roman political system. His brief time in power also coincides with the sacking of Rome in 410 AD, one of the most significant events in the history of the Western Roman Empire. The fall of Rome to the Visigoths under Alaric I is often cited as the symbolic end of the Western Roman Empire's supremacy, even though the formal collapse of the empire would not occur until 476 AD. Priscus Attalus's reign as the 85th emperor of the Western Roman Empire was a fleeting and largely ineffective period in the broader history of the empire's decline. His appointment by the Visigoths and subsequent deposition underscore the collapse of Roman authority in the West and the growing influence of barbarian groups. Though he left little lasting mark on Roman history, his brief reign is an important part of the narrative of the Western Empire's fall, a time when the empire, once mighty, was in its final death throes.